Welcome to Table Talk. I'm Rich.
I'm Rob. Today we're talking about some World War II stories, follow up from our Memoir 44 board game and beer pairing from last week.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm excited to share a couple stories, obscure facts or kind of rabbit hole stories that I found.
Love it. You know the show all too well, Rob.
Yeah, and I mean,
rabbit holes are what we do.
Well, and that's the thing is like, there's a lot of rabbit holes around World War II. There's so many stories. You have like the story, right, that everybody learns, that everybody knows, but it's like outside of that, we have these tales. One of mine is like a tall tale, right? Of maybe it happened. I don't know, but it's like there's so many things that are alive. It still feels like this war is breathing as some of these veterans are still alive with us. You know, it's a part of our culture.
Right. Oh man, yeah, that's great. That's actually really well said. It does feel like it's still breathing a little bit. So before we get into that, which sounds great, as you guys know, Brew and Board or Table Talk is the show about beer, board games, and everything else. Check out last week's episode where Rob and I talked about Memoir 44 and paired it with our beers that we're drinking right now. One thing I do want to talk about right at the top of this episode, and this is kind of the case, talking about anything that is somewhat serious, but also somewhat mainstream, right? Is I do want to mention, as a veteran myself, and as two brothers who had two grandfathers that served. Our grandfather on our mom's side served in the Coast Guard, and our grandfather on my dad's side served in the Merchant Marines during World War II. So I did want to just make a quick acknowledgement of how serious the World War II was and still is, honestly, and how seriously we do take it. We're going to have a very just nonchalant conversation right now, but that's just who we are. And we're just kind of we're gonna approach it kind of with a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of just kind of nonchalance and conversation. We might have a few jokes too, but we do want to acknowledge that the impact of that war and the atrocities of that war, the civil rights and human rights situations that happened during World War II, we're not making light of that at all. And it is, you're right, it's still breathing. It's still fresh. And it seems like something that we wouldn't even have to like kind of make a caveat for right at the beginning of the conversation. But to me, at least, it is something that I don't just want to dive into lightheartedly without really saying that, without really acknowledging that it still has an impact, right? So we just want to make sure we just make that little note right at the top of the episode. Another thing that we talked about last week, Rob, that I totally forgot that I wanted to bring up. Do you remember playing with Army Men?
Yes.
You remember the game? So Rob and I would, then you got to go back to last week's episode to hear other memories of Rob and I in games growing up. But if you don't know, Rob is my brother. He's standing in for Alex this month because Alex is, him and his wife are expecting. So prayers are with you, Alex and Caroline. Rob is here to fill in for Alex while he's away. And last week we talked about some of our gaming experiences as bros growing up. We had like miniature army sets. I remember that we played with. Traditional army men, the green ones and the tan ones. And one of us was green, one of us was tan. And we had tanks and we had supply trucks and we had
little bases, little forts.
Yeah, like little bases that the army men didn't even fit into for some reason. The scale was way off for some reason. And we would get a handful of rubber bands, each of us. And we'd set up our guys at both ends of the room. Yeah. And we would shoot rubber bands at each other. It's like a turn-based strategy game almost. Like we were like, it was my turn to shoot the rubber band at Rob's, and the last person who had a person's army man standing up was the winner. So I can't believe
leaning
I
on a
forgot about
tank
that.
didn't count, right? Leaning on a tank was dead, right? If the tank
Yeah,
wasn't
right.
there,
We would actually like run over to the other side of the room and like inspect the other person. If like most of their weight was leaning on something else, then they were dead. It got really complicated with the guys that were sprawled out on the ground with the sniper
they were
rifle.
hard. You had to
like
yeah.
Yeah. And then both of us had to have at least one guy that had like he was a huge target. He was just standing up like this.
He's an easy one.
Yeah. You gotta the dogs. That's what I'm hearing.
Somebody rang the doorbell, so the dogs are going crazy. Which is a good transition because I've got you'll see the dogs is good. I have dogs. We are dog lovers in the family. Hopefully they quiet down here in a minute. But I do have a little teaser there. One of my stories is about a war vet canine.
Oh, really? Well, let's dive into it. What's it about? Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So this is one of the tall tales that I was talking about.
Okay. Tail.
Tail. I believe this is true. Now, I'm going down these rabbit holes prepping for the podcast and looking at just kind of some maybe lesser known stories, right? And I come across Rip the dog, R.I.P. And he was found in East London after the bombings. So the Germans are bombing London, they're bombing factories and all sorts of different stuff, right? Well, this dog is found just roaming the streets. And he was adopted by the air raid warden. So there's this guy whose job it is to, I coordinate the air raid, sirens, response, all this stuff. He adopts this dog because this dog has a keen scent for finding people buried in rubble.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Rip the dog is the air raid warden's sidekick, and he responds to the bomb ratings, right? And he shows up on site, and he's sniffing around the rubble, and he'll start barking and identifying people buried under the rubble in London. Yeah. So
really,
that warden credits the dog with saving 100 people's lives in London, just buried in rubble. So that's civilians, women, children, men, civilians in East London.
100 lives saved just from people being buried underneath the rubble.
Yeah, a sniffer.
Wow.
Yeah,
sniffer.
He was he was given the Dickon Medal, which is apparently the Animal Medal of Honor in England.
What?
Yeah,
that exists. That crazy? The Dickon.
Dickon, Dickin.
All right, cool.
Interesting. Probably named after someone.
The fact that it even exists, period. The fact that it existed before 1940s.
Yeah, it was like that was this rabbit hole went down another rabbit hole. Like, what's this medal, right? And it was right. I think the medals started in like 1917 or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was just one of the recipients of that.
That is really fascinating. It makes sense, right? If like this story about this dog, and then they create this award, kind of like, and it's a lot of it is time perception, right? I mean, we're two millennials, right? Things seem like World War II, 1940. It seems like the perfect time frame where lots of stuff that we know and love or are familiar with are kind of like born in that time frame, right? Yeah. That's just how it feels to me. I mean, I don't know how true that is or not, but like you can usually date it back like, oh, the reason things are this way is because back in the day when World War II was going on, like this change and that happened. Like you can usually reason something back that far, and that's just to me seems like usually where the line ends. But yeah, 1917. What happened in 1917?
Yeah, I don't know.
So World War I was 1914 to 1921. So that story probably has something to do with World War I instead of World War II.
It might.
Yeah. That's a cool story though. I like that.
Yeah.
Shout out to our canine friends. And yeah, that's probably why your dogs were barking, because they're like, get to the story already.
Yes. They were excited for me to tell that story. I told it to them last night just in practice, and they were excited.
They've been in suspense all day long.
Yep.
Waiting for that story to be told on Table Talk in front of tens of viewers.
Yes, and welcome tens of viewers. And if you're not viewing, then view it on YouTube.
Hey, you know what? We got up to 24 subscribers, which kudos to you guys watching and listening. 24 subscribers on YouTube. That's awesome. We obviously want more. So here in the middle of the episode, we're going to ask you to go ahead and click the like and click the subscribe. So
Yep.
if not, we're going to stop telling stories about cute dogs that find people in the rubble. So, but yeah. Okay, I think somebody click subscribe so we can move forward. I got a story. Got to edit out my voice squeak. I got a story that I forget where I first heard about this. I think it was one of the documentaries on Netflix. You can, man, Netflix is a great place to get lost in World War II documentaries. I think it was from one of those documentaries that I was watching. Something that stood out to me as just one of these great war type of strategy moments that I mean, I wish I would have learned in school. I don't. Maybe this is kind of known by a lot of people. Hadn't heard of it before this documentary, and it's the Ghost Army. Have you heard of the Ghost Army?
Mm-mm.
So, I mean, it brings up so many images, like Aragorn running off of the ship with, with like the dead keep it the way it is shut, all this type of stuff. It kind of brings up like that image. It's instantly really cool, but it actually has something to do with World War II. There was actually a battalion, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops Battalion, also known as the Ghost Army. And I'm going to do a lot of reading just because I want to make sure I get it right. But they brought together artists, career military officers, and audio experts in a unique unit devoted to the art of deception. And we're talking like, this is like same level as like Trojan horse, right? Yeah. This is like same level as, a lot. There's a story of like the Revolutionary War with like, they took a fort by just like every guy like raised a flag up to show like they had more units. It's kind of like the same level as that, right? It's just this great deceit. So it's the first mobile multimedia tactical deception unit in U.S. Army history. So they used a combination of science and art, staged nearly 24 missions between May 1944 and 1945 with the sole purpose of tricking Nazi troops about the whereabouts of Allied forces in Europe.
Wow.
In the process, their efforts saved the lives of thousands of Allied soldiers. Its existence was kept secret for more than 40 years after the war ended.
What?
And remained officially classified until the mid-1990s, according to World War II Museum.
Wow.
So there's a couple. Well, here, let me read a little bit more. So one tactic of the Ghost Army was sonic deception. All right. Okay. So audio engineers pre-recorded sounds of military training exercises and the construction of trenches and bridges, and then edited them into soundscapes that could be played on massive speakers within range of German troops to convince the Nazis that the entire combat unit's occupied locations were undefended.
You know what that reminds me of?
What?
It reminds me of like the sounds you hear from the top of that castle in Monty Python and the Holy Grail as they're building this Trojan horse thing in the woods.
Oh my
it's
gosh!
Like
yes. The giant rabbit. Run away! Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's so bizarre. So what they did, and the reason I brought in the Luftwaffe. The reason I brought them in because they played this. I don't know if it's the same battalion. Maybe they had different battalions that did the same thing. But the Ghost Army, similar, had a really big role in D-Day. So Hitler was convinced that instead of Normandy, he was convinced that the invasion was actually going to happen at Calais. So he was convinced that that's where the landing was going to be. And the reason he believed that is because this unit or a unit like it had created a completely different like fake tanks, like tanks that had, and we'll show pictures, but tanks that from the ground look very fake, right? But from the air look very real. And they created battalions of these things to make it look like the D-Day landing was going to happen in Calais instead of Normandy. Yes. Which is it's so crazy to think that like these guys are just like they're running around with like plastic and like tarps and like they're fighting a war of deception with just like stage material. Like it's so crazy. I have another operation of the Ghost Army. So this was deemed their most successful operation, the operation of Viersen, Viersen, which took place from March 18th to March 24th, 1945. For that mission, the Ghost Army used 600 inflatable vehicles.
Inflatable.
Inflatable vehicles.
That's where our inflatable pool toys come from.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that snowman that's still outside your house right now, even though it's February. That's where it comes from. Fake uniform patches to impersonate soldiers from other units, and recordings of pontoon bridge building. Again, this loudspeaker sounds.
Yeah.
All to deceive the Germans into believing that the 30th Infantry Division and the 79th Infantry Division were preparing to cross the Rhine River. And it worked. The Germans moved the bulk of their defenses across the river from the suspected location of the two divisions, shelling an army that didn't exist.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's really cool just to think that there's, it's, and we romanticize this war so much, and we think of, the guys that were on the front lines, with the rifles and all that stuff. I like stories like this and the story that you shared, because they just broaden that perspective so much. I mean, not that the spotlight needs to be taken off of the guys in the front lines by any means, but to kind of share the wealth of the experience, really, because it was a world war. Everybody was involved, not everybody, but the world was involved on a large scale. So to hear, these people like engineers and artists and, these kind of just probably ragtag group of military officers that probably didn't have someplace to go, or maybe we're just right out of officer training, or we're just waiting for a new assignment. We're kind of attached to this fake battalion. Can you imagine, going through all your training, going through, painstaking, the situation just to realize you're going to be in charge of inflatable tanks. You're going to fake crossing the Rhine. You're going to be in Europe, Nazi occupied Europe, with inflatable vehicles.
It's a great use of obviously there's so many skills in the world, right? And carrying a gun on the front lines or operating a tank or all these things that we classically think of being a soldier,
right,
are just like a tiny subset. And so it's cool to see how even strategically these people were using all these other skill sets to do something
right,
almost completely unheard of, ludicrous, right? And the risks of, there aren't really any risks. Like if you get caught doing that, it's just you might get laughed at.
I mean, the situation with the Rhine River, I mean, they were getting attacked, right? The location where they were at was receiving fire, right? Like they were getting shelled pretty hard. So whether or not they were there, I don't know. Maybe they had packed up and moved away the second they realized that they had, they got the fish on the hook. But you're still in harm's way. It's almost as insane it is to really take a step back in history and imagine, you and I, obviously, we're of an age, if anything happened right now, we would definitely be involved, in a draft or anything like that. To imagine going from life as it is, life as normal, to being a soldier, jumping out of a trench, running across. I mean, I have a little bit of instinct for that now because I've gone through the training, but going from that, it's hard enough to imagine that. Imagine, not really being that well armed, right? Yeah. Pretending it's almost like running into war, with a toy gun, in just a plain imaginary, but going up against people that can really shoot back at you. It's almost more impressive in some ways. I say that very reservedly, but yeah, it's almost more impressive just pretending to have the forces that you obviously don't in a military situation. So yeah.
Yep, talking about ghost armies, I have a ghost story as well.
Okay.
So one of the It's similar along the lines of deceptions, but it's really not. It's not about deception really. It's about strategy, and it's a story about the USS Lexington. This ship it's an aircraft carrier that was built in the 20s, 28. So it's 1928 aircraft carrier.
Mm-hmm.
This is an early aircraft carrier, right? It's
right.
It's been around for a long time, even before the war breaks out. So in 1942, it wasn't involved in Pearl Harbor, but it was in the Pacific during Pearl Harbor. It was out on patrol. So in 1942, it's sent to Port Moresby in New Guinea, which really was, in the South Pacific area, was a port that was a supply port for a lot of the Allied forces in Australia, New Zealand, and then again throughout the islands in the South Pacific. So it's an important port, and the U.S. Navy had information that the Japanese were going to try and take Port Moresby. So in 42, along with a bunch of other ships, this USS Lexington was sent to Port Moresby to defend it. And I don't remember the story specifically, but for days, the weather was hazy, there was rain, you're in the middle of the ocean, but these fleets just kind of wander.
Danced around each other?
They couldn't find each other. Yeah. They'd send off fighters to go searching for the other opposing fleets, and they'd come back, they'd say, yeah, we got some over there, but they just couldn't find each other. So at one point, though, the USS Lexington did come in close contact with some Japanese fleets, and they took on 2 torpedoes, hit the Lexington, but it wasn't enough damage to sink it. So all the personnel on board start evacuating. The captain says, no, we're going to sink this ship. But they got out of range of the Japanese fleets and lost them. So then what happens is the U.S. Army, or the U.S. Navy, then decides to sink this ship, launches torpedoes at it after everybody's off the ship. Now, I don't want to gloss over this. 216, I think. Let me read it.
Wait.
216 people died.
Which ship? They're sinking the... Wait, okay, so hold on. Their own ship.
Their own ship.
They're sinking their own ship.
They're sinking their own ship. So it was damaged. It was going to be a chore to get this thing back to harbor, right? They didn't want it to be a Japanese trophy.
Gotcha.
So they sink this thing after everybody's off. But 216 people did die on board when the torpedoes hit from the Japanese. And then, so they sunk the ship right there in what was called the Coral Sea, the Battle of the Coral Sea. So it was lost right there. 1943, back in Massachusetts, there's a shipmaking company that's already making a new aircraft carrier, right?
Okay.
And it was going to be named, I didn't write the name of it down. It was going to be named something else. But the admiral of the Navy said, name it the Lexington. So in 1943, this boat launches, goes over to the Pacific Theater, and is seen numerous times by Japanese ships in the Pacific Theater for the next couple of years. And it became, it had the nickname of the Blue Ghost, because they Japanese
thought it was the same ship.
They sunk it. Yeah.
Wow.
They thought they sunk it in the Battle of Coral Sea, and there it was floating around again.
Wow.
Less than a year later.
Yeah, that is cool. That was a great idea. Whoever that admiral was suggested.
Yeah, right?
Another kind of warfare that really isn't. It's so much bigger than just lining up and shooting, across the way type of mindset. Like that mental warfare.
Yeah.
To have the presence to see something happening and being able to see it from your enemy's eyes. Kind of getting into kind of like a Sun Tzu type of conversation, but being able to kind of see the perspective that your enemy is looking at you as, that takes a tremendous just awareness, right? So that is a cool story. And like, and yeah, how terrifying if you were one of those guys that like, you're like, yeah, you come back home after that mission and you're like, yeah, we took down an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
And then you go back out and you're like, that's the same one.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And like, that's the thing is you have to assume these kind of mental strategic moves are being made all the time. And these are just like the tips of the iceberg, right? So, but let's say a couple thousand Japanese soldiers or seamen thought they saw this ship go down. Yeah. That's a couple thousand of how many, but you do that then and you do it again and the story grows and you do it, somewhere else with something different.
Right.
Like that adds up to like this big demoralizing, it's almost like like reverse propaganda.
Yeah. Those are our stories. They're World War II stories. I only had that one, the ghost ship, the ghost army. But yeah, there's so many World War II stories. There's not a shortage of World War II stories. I think that's partially the problem, right? Trying to find something that might shock people or might be something that you wouldn't see on a Hollywood movie or something. Although now that we've publicized the story about the RIP dog, I feel like that's like that's got Tom Hanks written all over it.
I think it does.
All right. Well, that's the show for this week, guys. Like again, we're splitting the episodes up. We're gonna post the longer version at the end of the month. But for now, we're gonna go ahead and call it quits. My beer's almost done, so I'm gonna get a refill for next week. But that's our show for now, guys. If you guys have any other stories that you want to share with us, please do comment and let us know. Anything that you think is interesting, anything that you want to add on to what we shared today. We'd love to hear from you. And go ahead, make sure you click the like button, click subscribe so you can get an update on all of our videos when we post. And then we'll be back to talk next week. I think next week we are talking about effects of World War II.
Effects of the war.
Correct?
Yeah.
Effects of the war. So tune in for that next week. We'll be posting same time, same place. Should be on a Wednesday, I believe. So check us out next Wednesday. And we'll see you then. Until next time, guys.
Be happy.
Brew happy. And game on.
Game on.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers. I think he's doing a Fortnite dance now. Something like it.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Take
man.
Thanks.
That's making the extended version.